Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. Enter the shadows, where every whisper is a clue, and the line between justice and obsession disappears. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, we will be talking about the Yuba County Five, and what better person to have on the show than Tony Wright. Tony Wright is the authority on this case, and he wrote the book, Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it, man.
And I sincerely mean this. If you go on YouTube and you search this case and you listen to what people are saying, they're quoting your book a lot, which I think is kudos to you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I ended up writing the book because I wanted to read a book about the case. It just ended up that way. And I thought, well, if I'm going to write the book, we got to get everything possible into that book. So I tried to do my best to leave. I try to look everywhere for information and clues, leaving no stone unturned. But I appreciate all the kind words that people have, and I'm glad people are using it as a resource for case investigation research.
Well, and to bring some more credibility to the book, not that it needs any, but you were actually given the case file, and you were able to sit down in the sheriff's department and go through that. And I think that that's something that a lot of authors, unfortunately, aren't able to do so because departments aren't that cooperative. Did you have an in that department, or were they just so open to you and wanting the exposure?
I think they were just open to it, and I didn't have a problem getting an appointment, even though I'm in Michigan, they're in California. They said yes. They said, if you're coming out, then you can come in and review the case files. And you're right, there are departments that, with certain files, they'll say no. In certain cases, they'll say no, just for various reasons. You can go state by state with FOIA law, and that's something I'm familiar with in my line of work, working with local government records and dealing with FOIA and working with police departments and attorneys. So I was very lucky to get into the sheriff's department in Yuba County, and they were very cooperative. They were great to work with, and they even took me up to the Plumas to see the area where the men went missing. And it seemed like they're very accommodating, and they're willing to talk about the case. And it was a great experience to review those case files. And so, yeah, like I said, it was a very lucky experience, and I didn't have an in there. So I just wrote a formal FOIA and spoke to the person in charge of the records department, spoke to the lieutenant, and they were like, yeah, if you want to pick this month to come out and you got a date, let's make it work. And they were, like I said, extremely accommodating. It was a great experience.
Well, I really am glad that did occur, because or else the public wouldn't know about this case as much as they do now. Can we start out with talking about who were the Yuba County Five, and from a personal perspective, what were their lives like?
Sure. The oldest was Ted Weir. He was 32. He was also the tallest guy in the group at 6 feet. He was, the fun uncle, as his nephew remembers. He did work for PG&E, which is Pacific Gas and Electric. He would do things like wind cable, and he had a job as a janitor, and I believe in a middle school, and worked a snack counter somewhere. So Ted did various jobs, and he was remembered for being incredibly athletic. His brother Dallas remembers him having like a major league style arm, that he was a left-hander, and he could throw a softball, he could throw a baseball, he could throw a football with the best of them. And that's what they remembered about Ted. He was just a super athletic guy, great memory, super nice very friendly, would wave to people all the time. Um, just liked to have fun, enjoyed like roller skating and mini golf, music, and he loved Pepsi. That was his favorite drink. And he had a bike, and if he had to, he could walk anywhere if someone couldn't give him a ride. And he enjoyed going to like the local convenience store to get Pepsi or to, like, remember those Hostess snack pies and
Yeah.
like Langendorf brands. Just he had a sweet tooth, so he enjoyed indulging in cakes and cookies and pies and washing it down with a Pepsi. But yeah, and he loved macaroni and cheese too. So just an all around nice guy. And then the second oldest person was Jack Madruga, who was 30. He lived with his mom, Melba. Jack was in Vietnam, so he was an Army vet. He served from around 1968 is when he 66 68 is when he was serving in the Army. He had some odd jobs. He was a dishwasher, and did a few other things here and there. A very nice, very quiet, reserved guy, very smart, and was sort of like the guy with the car that would drive his nieces and nephews around because he was the cool uncle to hang out with. So he had a 1969 Mercury Montego. So everyone wanted to hang out with Uncle Jack because, he loved rock and roll and checking out music. And if his nieces and nephews are going to a party, he'd go with them to sort of keep an eye on them, or they'd go to football games together or something like that. And like Ted, he also liked stuff like mini golf and roller skating. And, the both of them loved basketball, and they had a love for sports. There was also Bill Sterling. He was 29. Bill also, like Ted and Jack, loved mini golf, but he was a good bowler. And that's what he did. He was part of a group of people with disabilities that had a league team, and they were one of the best in the area. Bill also was part of like a Christian singles network, adults that would get together, local singles, and they'd go camping or have a day trip somewhere, maybe see a concert, just hang out and have a good time. Bill's family has been very quiet since 1978 and talking to the press and anyone else. So he's like the one guy of the group we know like the least about. But we do know from other people who have met him, super nice guy, and they said he was the one to talk to for bowling tips. Like he'd show you the right form, how to approach the line, how to release the ball. Bill was always willing to lend a helping hand, and he would do things like read people Bible quotes in hospitals, and he'd go to the library to study. He loved maps. If he saw something on TV, he had a little bit of a map collection, like those Rand McNally fold-up maps. He would just open one of those up and just kind of like look for the street or look for a place and mark it and say that would be a good place for us to hang out sometime. And especially like if it was like a mini golf location, he'd be like, wait, where is this? So, and he would just get his map out and just do everything he could to find this place to hang out. And then there was Jackie Hewitt, who was the youngest at 24. He just loved hanging out with his family and his unofficial big brother, Ted Weir. So they liked roller skating and mini golf. Jackie was very kind. He had a couple brothers, had a family dog named Bo. He had a sister. So he loved hanging out with his family, and they do things like go fishing or hunting or just hang out and have fun. And then there was Gary Mathias, who was 25. He was a guy who was also in the military. He had served in the Army, I think around 1970. And that's when his schizophrenia became an issue at that point in his life. He enjoyed rock and roll. He was a great harmonica player. He was also an athlete. His sister said he played football and other sports in high school. So they said he was just an all-around gifted athlete. Enjoyed his family too, loved hanging out with people. Just an all-around good guy. So that's basically the nutshell of the Yuba County Five as far as who they were and their likes and things that, and their hobbies and whatever. So yeah, it's a good group of guys.
Yeah, and when you're reading this book, that's one of the areas that I really appreciated was that you highlighted their abilities and did not focus on the disabilities. And even
Right.
though the disability is relevant to this case, especially as far as decision making, I think you did a really good job of showing that these guys were living a good life, it
Yeah.
appears. And they had friends, they had people that loved them and cared for them, and they were contributing towards society. They're working, uh, and it sounds like they're just a good group to be around.
Yeah,
And they
absolutely.
Right, and they had hopes just like anyone their age, where their big thing was the Gateway Gators
Hmm.
and participating in basketball. And in fact, this case kind of starts off with them planning to go to this basketball game in Chico, California.
Right.
Can you kind of tell us more about that?
Sure. You said they were part of the Gateway Gators, and Gateway was a nonprofit that helped people with disabilities and mental illness, like job skills and life skills. But they also had a basketball program attached to the program, which was linked to the Special Olympics. So they had this basketball tournament in the Sacramento area on February 25th to get a little bit hyped up for the game, I guess you would say. They went to see their favorite team, UC Davis, and they were playing at Chico State. So it's getting to be the end of the basketball season. And they don't know if they're going to head into like the playoffs because it's a Division II basketball team. And it's one of the last games they know they could all catch. So they said, we can go to Chico Friday, come home, get up early, and then meet everyone for the big game on Saturday. So the trip was about a 50-minute drive up to Chico. They were going to watch the game. UC Davis was a really good team. Chico State was a really bad team. And they were at the game, and UC Davis won. They went to a convenience store to get snacks, and that's like the last. That's the last that they're seen. And there would be another witness later, but the plan was to go to the basketball game, and that's what they wanted to do. And they had made trips out of town before, and talking to the family members when I was interviewing them, they would say, yeah, they went out of town. And there's even information in the case file on Thursday, the 23rd. They went to Sacramento to have like an impromptu basketball practice. And they went to a school they had never been to before. So they kind of had a little bit of a busy, Thursday, Friday, Saturday planned for themselves. Practice, basketball game to watch, and then go down to Sacramento and play in their basketball game. And if they won that game in Sacramento on the 24th, they would go to Los Angeles in July of that year at the main Special Olympics event at UCLA. And if they went to UCLA, they'd also get complimentary tickets to Disneyland. So it was like, oh, we got to win this game because, we want to go to LA and, go over to Disneyland and have a good time.
Yeah, and we know that they actually made it to the game, and we know that there's a witness that saw them in the convenience store. And we also know, like you said, it's not like they've never made a group trip before. They've been able to navigate their way around to these places. So it's not a case of they didn't know where they were going. And I've got a map here that I pulled from your book, but there is Highway 70 and Highway 99 that they could take either one, correct? And we believe that they took Highway 99. Is that correct?
We think going to the game, going to the game, it's hard to tell. I think they took Highway 70
Okay.
because it seems that they started their trip. So it would have been Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. They were hanging out together during the day. And Bill's parents ran a gas station in Yuba City. And his parents remember the guy stopping by, filling up the tank. But They never said if the others were in the car. My understanding from what I'm reading into the case is they started in Yuba City, drove over to the Marysville, Linda Olivehurst area where Ted and Jackie and Gary lived. And Jack Madruga lived on that side of town too. Bill was the only person in Yuba City, which interestingly enough is not in Yuba County. And anyway, it would make sense for them to go on 70 if it seemed like the majority of the guys were on the 70 side of town.
Okay.
And it would have made more sense if they left Yuba City, if Jack picked everyone up, but then drove across town to get to the gas station where Bill's parents sort of managed the place. That would have made sense too. And we're not sure which way they went, but either highway would have taken them right into Chico because both highways kind of merge at a point north of where they live and south of a place, or north of a place called Oroville, which plays a role in this case, in my opinion, and it just leads them right into Chico.
So, what do we know about what happened after? I know this is going to be a lot of speculation, especially with witness involved, but um, what do we think happened after they left that gas station?
After they left the gas station, they would have gotten on the highway. They would have been at the game. They went to the game because there's a witness who saw them at the game. They left the game and went to Bears Market, a convenience store in Chico, California. The person who was working there, she saw them and recalled they were kind of rushing through the aisles because they must have known she was about to close the store. They brought all their stuff up to the counter. They paid for it. They left. From there, this is where the story gets really, it goes into a big question mark. They get back in the car. At some point, they have to make a decision to stay or take 99 to Yuba City or 70 to Marysville. To me, it would have been more of an easier decision to go to 99 because that would take them to Yuba City and then they just drive over after dropping off Bill Sterling and get the other guys home. So it's kind of hard to figure out what's going on that night. But at some point, either on 99 or on 70, they take that way and go into Oroville. And you can exit into Oroville from 99 near this place called like Thermalito. And if you go over a little bit more, excuse me, to the east, you can exit 70 right into Oroville. And then either way of exiting into the city will get you on something called the Oroville Quincy Highway, which led them up into the Plumas National Forest. And that's what we know. They had to be on the Oroville Quincy Highway. And to get on it, you exit into Oroville. And that leads them up into the Plumas. Now, why they exit the highway or, go that way, it's just speculation. I always thought maybe a restroom break, someone wanted to use a phone, maybe someone didn't like the food at the convenience store and wanted something a little bit more substantial, like maybe a burger or something. And maybe they thought, oh, I think there's a place in Oroville we can stop at. And so for whatever reason, they exited the highway and they got on this Oroville Quincy Highway and it just went right up into the Plumas National Forest. And that's a long drive.
And there's the Plumas National Forest. It's pretty desolate. There's no. I've seen videos of it. I've never been, but it looks like there's nothing around except for the actual forest. It's not like you can see in the distance, a Burger King or something that you may want to drive to. It appears to me that if you're on that road, I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere. Would that be accurate, especially at night?
Absolutely. If you get into Oroville, you're in town. And it's a small town. It's not a big place at all. Maybe, I don't know, 10, 12,000 people at the time, if that. And once you get into the Plumas, there are a few homes here and there that you'll see, a few residences here and there. And the majority of the trip, it is pretty desolate. You're up in the middle of nowhere. And I've been there during the day and during the night. And when you're there during the day, you can kind of like, wow, experience, the Plumas. It's very beautiful. At night, it's a little bit more like, oh, where are we? This is like the middle of nowhere. It's one of those situations. So it is desolate and it's dark up there, especially at night. And you get to a point where some of the roads are not paved, which is something Jack Matruga would not want to drive on as a driver. He preferred nice, smooth, paved roads. And the weather would definitely turn up that way because there would be snow and the weather would be colder. And these guys did not like to be in dark places. And this is right where they went into the Plymouth National Forest. So, like I said, a few houses here and there, but not much. And you're pretty much on your own once you get up that way, especially late at night.
So we know that the boys, they go missing, and obviously at some point their parents become concerned. They contact law enforcement. Can you walk us through those first couple days of what happened after that night where they went missing?
So, into the late hours, the families were worried because nobody was home. Nobody called because they had a reputation of calling home if they were running late. And the family started calling each other saying, hey, have you seen Bill? Have you seen Ted? And nobody saw anything. Nobody heard from anyone. And once the morning comes around, they're like, all right, we're going to go where they're supposed to meet for this basketball tournament. It was supposed to be at a department store parking lot. We're just going to see what's going on there. The guys aren't there. The coach isn't there. One of the family members who stopped by had found out that a bus had left and they were too late. And they thought, did they come here late and get right on the bus? Because they don't have their uniforms, which is really odd. They called the sheriff's department around 8 a.m. on Saturday, and they said they haven't been missing long enough. And they're adults, and they were out on a Friday night, and they didn't come home, so this isn't suspicious to us. And the family spend most of Saturday, from what I've been told, driving around, calling around, checking the highways, and I think some family members even went up to Chico to try to find their cars, and there was no luck. They had nothing but dead ends. Some family members checked the highways thinking, well, if the car broke down, they probably tried walking somewhere to a payphone and they were probably tired or just wandering around somewhere. So, just drive the highways, maybe you'll find them. And there's no sign of these guys. And by 8 o'clock on Saturday, they call back to sheriff's department and say, hey, they're still missing. We need to put out, an APB, and we need to help look for these guys because, hey, they have disabilities and one guy has a mental illness. And I think that kind of got the ball rolling with the sheriff's department. And then they started putting alerts out down south towards Sacramento and then north towards the Oregon state line. So Saturday leads into Sunday, which leads into Monday, and no sign of these guys. There's no information, no leads. The sheriff's department's looking around trying to find these guys. They're talking to the parents. And then Tuesday night, a Forest Service ranger calls, I believe, Butte County, which is where they would have abandoned the car, says, hey, I saw that car up in the Plymouth National Forest. This is where it's at. You got to come find it. So members of law enforcement go to that area, and they find Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego abandoned in the Plymouth National Forest. And it's late Tuesday night when everyone gets there and tries to figure out what happens. Okay, there's this car on the road. No one's in it. So how to get here? And they had to quickly assess, did the guys drive it here and they got out, or did something happen somewhere else and someone brought that car up that way to sort of like abandon the car and kind of throw off law enforcement? So the end result from that was, well, we got to do a search and rescue operation in case they got out of the car and they're wandering somewhere around the forest. But the problem that they had was, okay, we've had Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, close to 5 days of not seeing these guys. And now we're kind of running up against the clock because we've had freezing temperatures. There's snow up here. If they didn't find shelter, we're pretty much doomed. And that was the situation. And that's how this whole sort of search and finding these guys kind of just got underway. Very tense 5 days from Friday through Tuesday. So the families were definitely feeling it.
Yeah, and I remember in your book you were talking about how it sounds like they threw a lot of things at it, and some people came forward, to include a guy that was a water witcher that said that he could,
Yeah,
you know,
he could find them,
those are
but he
all
didn't.
right. He could use a stick basically to find out where they are. Uh, and I do think that's important that you mention the time frame and the fact that 5 days have gone by. You're in freezing temperatures. This turns more into a recovery mission than a finding them alive. I'm sure they probably were not very optimistic at that point.
No, they
At,
weren't.
can we talk about when a witness comes forward?
So around the time that the car is found, a witness by the name of Joseph Jones tells law enforcement, I was on the same road they abandoned their car, where they abandoned their car. My car, and the distance varies, but it could be like almost like 100 feet or 100 yards. And we don't really know the distance because eventually Shones moves his car. But Joseph Shones was a resident of Berry Creek, California, which is south of where the guys abandoned their car. He was just up that way for totally unknown reasons. He got stuck in the snow, and he tried to push his car out. And his car was a Volkswagen Beetle. When he tried pushing his car out, it triggered a heart attack. And since he had a heart attack, he couldn't do anything. So he got back in his car and let the car run and waited for help. Sometime, according to him, around 11 p.m. or midnight, the guys pull up in their car. And according to the stories, or stories, excuse me, they either get out of the car, come up to his car, leave, get out of the car, run into the woods, or they're pulling up with a red pickup truck behind them, and they either get into the pickup truck and vanish, or they run away from the pickup truck and go into the woods. So Shones has quite possibly just at least 5 stories about what happened that night. And he's willing to talk to anyone who's willing to listen, especially the press. And he gives different versions of what happens. And law enforcement will interview him 2 times. And they get they get a different story each time they talk to him. And he's basically saying, I'm recovering from a heart attack, and this is what happened that night. And then they find out his wife went up to retrieve his car. She brought it back to their residence. She gives a version of the events too, and it's just weird. And the night that Shones sees the guys go missing, he gets back in his car. He says he lets it run until it's either out of gas or the battery dies. And he walks 8 miles down the Oroville Quincy Highway to a place called Mountain House, which is sort of like a lodge for some of the locals up there. And there's a bar. And he goes into the bar in the early morning hours, probably, I should say, more like 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. And he gets a glass of water. He asks for some aspirin. And basically all he says is, I should have done this 2 years ago. And he asks for a ride home. Someone gives him a ride home. And that's all he did that day. He made no mention of those guys in the car vanishing into the woods. So if they did this disappearing act into the woods, you would think he'd go down and say, hey, I had this weird encounter with these guys last night, and they ran into the woods. I don't know what their deal was or what's going on, but someone may want to look into it. But he never says anything. And
Do you believe the fact that he actually walked 8 miles?
That's something I've talked to a few people about, and we've tried to figure this out. So if you have a heart attack, can you walk 8 miles? It doesn't matter the temperature, but you're probably 4,200 feet up in elevation. You are walking downhill, but it's below freezing temperatures, probably, I don't know, 28, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. The way Shones explains it, he walks a little bit, then falls and hits the ground and pulls himself back up and walks again. I mean, it's sometimes I believe this miracle walk, sometimes I don't. I've been having a hard time figuring out if this guy actually could walk 8 miles. And it is very possible that he did do this walk while having a heart attack. But I did interview a neighbor of his who said he didn't think it's a heart attack. He thought Shones had suffered from angina and not a heart attack, had a heart attack, because he remembers Shones' neighbor complaining about having angina. And so whatever happened to Shones that night, we'll never know because he's passed away. But it's very likely that Shones made this walk. But at times I'm very skeptical what happened, because Shones is such a bizarre character. And this is what's just another frustrating piece to this case. All these things that have happened, and yet we really don't know what happened that night, which is so hard with this case.
Yeah, it made no sense to me of why you would be up there. I've heard statements of, oh, well, I was just fooling around. He also went to a bar before that, right? Where he claimed that he just had 1 beer, which basically is like the multiplier, of, I believe you multiply 10 if someone is at a bar by themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, who goes to a bar by themselves and has 1 beer? I don't think that's possible. I would believe him walking 8 miles before I believe he had 1 beer.
Yeah. In talking with law enforcement, and then the lady who worked there, she claimed she served him 3 beers at Mountain House before. So he had started at Mountain House and then drove away and got stuck, and then apparently walked back to Mountain House. She believes, or either she said it or Sean said it, that he started at another bar, had about 3 beers, went to Mountain House, had about 3 beers. So already he's 6 beers in. Who knows if he had been drinking at home and ran out and thought, well, I need more beer, and
Right.
decided to go to a bar. And then if he got tired of one bar, he'd go to another bar. So who knows how many beers he had that night. But what the lady at Mountain House remembers is when Shones left, he's driving up this road where the guys would eventually get stuck. And she's like, why is he going that way? If he goes that way and he gets stuck like he usually does, no one's going to be up that way and he's going to be out of luck. She said that was so strange. He drove north. He's supposed to drive south to get back home. So right then and there, we've got a witness watching Shones drive in the wrong direction that night. So it's crazy.
And that just sounds like he may have been drunk, and that's why he drove up that mountain. Is just, his judgment was impaired that hard. Is there any logical reason for why the um the boys drove up that road that you can think of besides just being lost?
I don't think there's a logical reason for being on that road, because I've made the trip twice to go up towards where they abandoned the car, and it's a long drive. It's not like, oh, one wrong turn, oops. You have to go through town. You have to go drive up, the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Um, you If they were lost, they seem to have all these opportunities to turn the car around and say, nope, this is the wrong way. And if you see snow and you see pine trees and the roads are winding and you probably see a sign for the Plumas, you should know you're a long way from home. And even before they get into the Plumas, they have to cross a big bridge, or big enough, called the Bidwell Bar Bridge, that goes over Lake Oroville. If you're driving on that, you know darn well you're heading up into the Plymouth National Forest, and that's not anywhere on the way home back to Marysville or Yuba City. And if you're on that bridge, you should know you're way off course and you need to go back into town, get it together, and get back on 70 or 99. And driving that's the one thing. The first time I was on that road, I thought, these guys, someone had to say, like, this is not the right way home. Like, what are we doing? Like, we need to we get back, turn around, go to town, because this is not the right way home. And there is no logical reason to be on that road. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
I've got a few thoughts on that. Is there any thought, or I know there's no evidence of this, but I'm gonna throw it out there. But it just seems to me, if you're gonna go in the opposite direction and we're sure that they know how to get home, and if they did get lost, we know that, or we believe that they would have the mindset to turn around and, go in the, correct direction. Would there be any scenario where road rage, or they picked up a person that was in the car? Have any of those, theories been explored?
Yeah, they've talked about possible road rage where someone could have had an issue with them and maybe it started or like, one thought I've had, or theory I've had, is, okay, when they pull into Oroville, maybe they run into some locals who might be drunk and see these guys and think they might be easy to pick on, and then the guys actually stand up to these others and it causes a fight, and that leads to a chase into the Plumas. I've definitely thought about that. I've definitely thought about maybe another road rage type of incident while driving home. They have talked about a hitchhiker, and they asked the families, hey, would the guys pick up a hitchhiker? And the families are like, I don't think so. But if they were sort of a convincing individual, it's possible. But these theories have been explored, but unfortunately, it's hard to prove if anyone else was in the car or anyone was chasing them. And was shown seeing the pickup truck. Could that have been road rage or something like that? Is that possible? It's just hard to tell at this point. But they were exploring those options at the time, especially like picking up a hitchhiker.
Yeah, and what kind of triggered that thought for me is you were mentioning in the book about some of the incidents that occurred at Gateway, where I believe you called him Fireball Man. Let's see. Yeah, the Fireball Freak. Had to go to my other notes. Yes, the Fireball Freak. So, can you tell us what happened with that, just so people can get a perspective of everything was not positive around that time with people that have special needs or uh, mental health issues?
Right. So 3 years before they went missing, there was a fire at one of the Gateway buildings, and it was ruled to be arson. And it was believed someone intentionally started this fire, and the people who ran Gateway had no idea why someone would intentionally start a fire. But then there were a few more attacks of arson, and then the attacks started to focus on employees, like cars were set on fire, and then it led to the murder of the executive director, who died when someone doused him with chemicals and set them on fire. So this like reign of terror lasted a good part of 1975, and it just came to an abrupt end. They called the guy Weirdo the Fireball Freak, and they appealed to the press and said, whoever you are, you need to stop doing this. You need professional help. It's just, this doesn't make any sense. And why are you attacking us and going after our staff? And people who worked there were, looking over their shoulders constantly, like, are we next? Because there were these threats that were coming in over the phone. And it was a real, just unnerving time for the staff. They never found out who Weirdo the Fireball Freak was. They never solved the murder of that executive director. And they also tried linking those events to the disappearance of the five. Did they know the person who did it? Did they run into them somehow? And maybe the person was afraid the guys would talk about them being the arsonist / murderer. That was brought up early in the case, but that too kind of led nowhere, along with like the hitchhiker theory or the road rage theory.
Well, let's jump to when they were actually discovered, or the four that were discovered. Can you walk us through what led to them being discovered and the circumstances that we know?
Sure, it was early June, around the 6th, 1978, when three guys were on like a weekend motorcycle ride through parts of the Plumas National Forest. They had planned a trip, but conditions up in the forest, due to like a really bad winter that ran into spring, kind of slowed them down, because they still had areas where there was snow on the road, and there were downed trees, and parts of the roads were washed out or ruined from either like a mudslide, because there was torrential rains too. And they just kind of felt really frustrated with their trip. It wasn't going as planned. So they stopped by a place called the Daniels Inc. Campgrounds near this fire base, Granite Basin area. And they said, there's a map here. If we look at this map, we can just get back home and call it a day. When they get to the place with the map, there's a really bad smell. And they determined that the smell is coming from these trailers that are used by the Forestry Service for various things. One of the guys on the motorcycle trip notices the window to the trailer's broken, he sort of puts his head into the trailer, looks in, sees someone on one of the bunk beds, and he knows they're dead. And he tells the others, like, there's a dead body in there. So they go find it. They have to find a payphone, which takes them a while. And they call the sheriff's department and say, hey, we found a dead body. And it takes them a little bit of convincing on the phone to convince the sheriff's department where they found this dead body to come up and take a look. The sheriff's department comes up, and then they start looking around this trailer, which was used by the Forestry Service. There's a guy on the bed. He's been in the bed for a while. He has like about 8 sheets tucked around him. This person has lost a lot of weight. And when they examine the clothes and some of the personal belongings, they determine it's Ted Weir. And Ted Weir was 6 foot, about 220 pounds when he got to the trailer. And he lost anywhere between 80 and 100 pounds the time he was there. He also had beard growth because he was clean shaven at the time he went missing. And they found that odd as well. So they found one person, which was Ted. And they start looking around the trailer area by doing a search. And they'll go, I'd say about 3 miles down the road, where they find Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. They were near a road. Both sets of remains were sort of like divided by the road, but they had been scattered by animals. So those two were found not long after that. And then about a day or so after Sterling and Madruga are found, the scattered remains of Jackie Hewitt are found about a mile south of the trailer. So law enforcement's found 4 remains. Ted's the only set of remains that were complete. And they're just preparing to find Gary's remains because, okay, they found 4, they'll find the 5th. But I think Jackie's discovery was around June 8th through the 10th. And after finding Jackie, they start looking for Gary Mathias. No luck finding him. They spend about 9 to 10 days looking for Gary, and then they call it off and say, we're done. Can't find the guy. And that's how the case came to a close, too. So they had found the 4 bodies. They had found the remains of 4 of the men. Couldn't find the 5th. Call it a day. They do send, all the remains in for autopsies. They try to get some latent prints off of some of the items that were in the trailer where they had found Ted, because there were military C rations in there that had to be opened with a specific military can opener. And there was a few other items in there that they could have lifted fingerprints from, and they sent that off for fingerprint analysis. But Ted had such bad frostbite on his hands that they couldn't lift any latent prints off his fingers. And so they were kind of like, well, what's the point if Ted's up there? And they really, according to the state of California, who did the research and did the forensic work there, they weren't able to really get any prints off like the C ration cans or any of the other items that they had sent to them for examination. So it's like, okay, we found 4 bodies, can't find the 5th. Let's call it a day. And like the case gets buried for close to 40 years before people find out about it, because they're doing podcasts and YouTube channels, and they're like, hey, there's this case. So let's research it. And, here we are, talking about this case 47 years later. It was hard finding those remains. It was very sad. And
So do you think they just
like the trailers
gave up?
really
Do you
weren't.
think there's any way? Can you hear me?
Gave up? Oh yeah, gave up. Was there any way?
I'm sorry. Is there any do you think that the police department or sheriff's department just gave up, or do you think this was a case where animals may have gotten the remains and there probably isn't a strong likelihood that he's going to be recovered? Or is there any way that he, made it to another part of the mountain? What do you think?
I think Gary left the trailer at some point and perished in the Plumas. And when they were doing the searching up there, they had talked about there's these spots in the Plumas that are places you just don't go into, because if you're going to hike into this area, you're really going to have a hard time getting out. And I talked to a couple people who said, mining used to be a thing up there. And so if you could get a mine and you had like a mine shaft, if Gary fell into one, you wouldn't know it unless you somehow stumbled across that mine shaft. And they also said that there's manzanita bush up there that's pretty thick. And if Gary perished within like dense, shrubbery or whatever, it'd be hard to find his remains. So my belief is Gary did pass away. His remains were probably as well scattered by animals, but he must have been in a location that either they never looked or is like, in a location that's too remote, or like thick in the manzanita bush that they're just not going to go through and examine. Another person said there were some streams and bodies of water up there that he could have fallen in and be carried down like a stream or river, and maybe his remains are carried far away, and no one will ever find it just because where it would have ended up for whatever reason. So, and if Gary Mathias had went somewhere and walked out of the woods, I find it impossible, not being medicated as a schizophrenic, that he would not have had some sort of run-in with some individual or law enforcement, where they would have picked him up and been like, hey, who is this guy? We found him. He says he's Gary Mathias. So I'm very convinced he perished 1978 in the Plumas. And unfortunately, there's been wildfires since. And I think all the damage that's done to the area and all the cleanup they do up there, to deal with the forest fire and what happened, I think it's going to be very, very hard to find his remains at this point.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm sure that's very difficult, especially during that time. I've looked for bodies before, and I remember the last time that we had one that was in a wood/swamp farmland area. This is in the 2020s, where we had cell phone data, so we could even tell where the suspect had taken the body. And even with that technology, it was still very difficult. We ended up finding them due to vultures in the area. Uh, but I can only imagine in the 70s you're trying to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
So
they even tried asking the Air Force to help, like do an aerial reconnaissance. And they said there's no way our work could help your case because doing aerial reconnaissance is not going to pick up a body. The forest is too dense, and we're not going to be able to zero in on like a skull or something. They said that would just be a waste of our time. We're just flying over the Plumas. I mean, that was probably their most high-tech attempt at doing something to find Gary's remains.
okay, sorry, you froze up there for a second. I think we're good. I'm going to edit that out, so don't worry about it.
No worries.
So Wells, what I think is interesting is at some point you actually have a cassette that you get from a family member that had recorded our star/only witness having a meeting with the family. And I believe, was it you that deciphered it because the audio was really bad?
Yeah, so there were a few tapes. One was Shones talking to the family. I don't know what happened to the tape, but it was impossible to decipher. But I do give a huge amount of credit to Nick Kyle, the host of The Missing Enigma, for helping out with that tape and developing a transcript. To the best of our abilities, and I think Mopac Audio, who did a Yuba County 5 podcast, listened to that tape as well, and they cleaned it up, and that's a huge shout out to them for that work. We tried to figure out this Joe Shones tape, and it was tough to figure out, but there are these, it's like these weird moments. It's like back in the day when you had your radio and you're trying to pick up a station and it's like static and then it's clear for a moment. That's the way this Shones tape was. And when it was clear and we could hear what he was saying, we could kind of get bits and pieces of what he was talking to the family about that night. But yeah, that was the worst of the tapes. They talked to a couple psychics. Those tapes are just bad in the way it's just two really bad psychics, like just out of their league trying to solve this case. And then there's a very brief tape with the sheriff at the time, Jim Grant, talking to the families about why hiring a private investigator might not be the best solution for their case. But the Shones one was the one that frustrated us because it was it was just in the worst condition. And that was the one we really wanted to hear from start to finish because it was also the longest conversation they had recorded, about an hour, I would say. And so we were just so frustrated just getting bits and pieces of that. But there is a transcript we've been able to, or the Missing Enigma has been able to put together, and I've been able to help them out with that. And trying to have something to show what Shones was talking about. There's a lot of parts of that tape that are just impossible to figure out just because of the deterioration of the tape. That was a little bit of a tongue twister.
Has there been any other updates since the book has come out about this case?
No, I mean, there was, after the book came out, someone that I know who's sort of like a off the record helper said, hey, they found a body up in near the Plumas area. It wasn't Gary, but it was someone else who had gone driving through a part of the Plumas, lost control of their car, and went off into like a ravine that was hard to see from the road. So this was a person that had perished in a car accident that people couldn't find this guy for the longest time. And like you were saying with your incident, like in the 2020s, this person crashed around the same time and was impossible to find. There hasn't been much, and I do occasionally talk to Yuba County to see if they have any leads. And there's really nothing, even with Files of the Unexplained on Netflix covering the case. There's no new details to share with this. Unfortunately, there are people really interested in the case and want to help with research, and that's great. We're trying to get new information to come to light. If maybe there's some, further digging we can do into certain things that were going on at the time, maybe in the Plumas or, in the Marysville area, but nothing new, unfortunately. And people are still talking about the case in the area, saying that something bad went down that night, but it's nothing more than just local rumors and community gossip.
What do you believe, or what is your theory of what happened that night to include why they went to the Plumas?
I think something happened when they went to Oroville. When they got off the highway, they got into town. They either ran into some drunk locals or someone they might have had beef with for some other reason. and there was some kind of conflict in Oroville, which led to a chase that sent the men into the Plumas. And they might have thought they could shake their, you know, tormentors by losing them in the Plumas. They probably thought maybe if they cut through the Plumas or, make a trip that way, they could, find another way to get home. But I think something happened in Oroville, and that something in Oroville is unknown. But I think it was the spark that sent that night it just out of control. And it ended up with the men, you know, getting stuck on that road, which in itself is really odd because it was an unpaved, snow-covered road that the driver, Jack Madruga, would not normally want to drive because he hated unpaved roads. There were potholes in the road. He would not have wanted to deal with that. And when they found the car, no underbody damage. It had navigated its way up that road, and law enforcement said someone had to know that road. And from my perspective, it's very unusual. They just kept driving up that way. And I go back to Oroville. Something happened in that town that changed the journey home that night. And there's always been talk of fights or the town bully, catching up with him in Oroville. It's all speculation, but that's where I'm at this point. That was the place where everything that went wrong, it's where it began. And it just went from there. It just got worse from that point. And I believe someone either threatened them or scared them, and it just sent them up into the Plumas, or they followed them up into the Plumas, either by force, by using a gun or something, and then they just kind of left the men to die up in those up in the woods. It's so frustrating.
It is frustrating, and it's especially frustrating for it to be decades and decades later and not have any of these basic answers. And I'm sure that, I really feel for these families for what they've had to endure and not be able to, you know, properly know what happened to their loved one. That's definitely a shame too. Uh, Is there any way that we can support you or your book? Tell us where we can get the book at.
Sure. The book's available at Amazon. There's a Kindle version, and there is a paperback version at Amazon. It's also sold through Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. You can get the books there. You can go to Genius Book Publishing, which is the publisher of the book, and you can get copies there. So whatever you choose as far as your shopping, like I said, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, or supporting Genius Book Publishing, you'll be able to get a copy of the book. I'm doing some speaking events here in my home state of Michigan. November, I've got a talk in Portage, Michigan. January, I will be speaking in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I do have some February 2026 dates lined up in Michigan at some other libraries over by Detroit. I do have some out-of-state sessions lined up, but they're not finalized yet, so I can't say anything at this point. But I still am getting out to talk about the book. I still have social media presence on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me on Facebook under Tony Wright, author, and Instagram, Tony Wright, author. And if you want to talk about the book, we can talk about the book or the case. I've met people from around the world who talk about the case and are very interested. And it's good to see people do care about the case. They do have interesting theories to share. People from different experiences with different ideas. It's always refreshing to hear something new and maybe a different perspective on the case. So I appreciate talking to people.
Yeah, and I think that when you have victims of violent crimes like this, that it's important that their memory continues. This is something that we did when my brother and I wrote our book, is to make sure that Virginia Olsen's name was talked about through podcast and other, articles. And I really appreciate that you did that with the Yuba County Five. So, folks, it is Things Aren't Right: The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five by Tony Wright. Tony, thank you again. And if you would like to support me, excuse me, if you'd like to support me, you can buy my book, A Murder on Campus, A Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. I wrote that with my brother, Brian Santana. You can also like and subscribe to this channel on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Tony, thank you very much, and good night.